The Interstellar University of Xenological Studies wasn't just a campus. It was a living, breathing monument to galactic diversity, suspended in a massive orbital ring that circled a neutron star. Artificial gravity generators hummed quietly, maintaining perfect environmental conditions for over 372 distinct biological configurations. Jack Reeves, human, Earth native, and apparently the universe's most unexpected exchange student, stood out like a sore thumb, or more accurately, like a plain brown crayon in a box of iridescent, shape-shifting alien art supplies. My admission to this institution had been nothing short of a bureaucratic miracle. Most species viewed humans as primitive, technologically nascent creatures from a backwater planet. But someone, probably after consuming significant quantities of whatever passed for alcohol in their civilization, had pushed through my application. The lecture hall today was a marvel of xenoengineering. Floating platforms adjusted in real time, creating personalized microclimates for each student. To my left, a crystalline being from the methane lakes of Proxima Centauri b maintained a delicate frost pattern around its edges. To my right, a gaseous entity from a high-pressure atmospheric world remained contained within a shimmering force field. And then there was me, Jack Reeves, wearing standard-issue university jumpsuit, looking decidedly meat-based. Professor Krellax, a being that resembled what would happen if an octopus mated with a quantum computer and was then raised by a particularly bureaucratic traffic cone, controlled the room with an impressive array of tentacles. Each appendage seemed to have its own consciousness, simultaneously managing holographic displays, adjusting environmental controls, and occasionally scratching what passed for his head. Xenobiological adaptation, Krellax intoned, his translation device rendering his gurgling language into crisp academic standard, represents the pinnacle of evolutionary strategy. We will today examine how different species overcome environmental challenges. A ripple of anticipation moved through the classroom. Holographic displays began generating complex simulations of planetary environments, each more extreme and exotic than the last. A student raised what might generously be called a hand, though it was more a cluster of bioluminescent tendrils. "Professor, might we discuss the Zarn TK adaptation to sulfuric acid environments?" Krellax's middle eye, the green one, swiveled with academic excitement. "Excellent suggestion, ZX Lara. However, we have a unique opportunity today. Student Reeves from Earth has been uncharacteristically silent during our discussions of survival mechanisms." Every sensory appendage in the classroom turned toward me. Hundreds of eyes, some crystalline, some liquid, some pure energy patterns focused with predatory academic intensity. I suppressed a smile. They had no idea what was coming. Humans are many things. We're not the strongest, we're not the fastest, we're not the most technologically advanced, at least, not yet. But we are, without question, the most batshit crazy species in the known universe when it comes to surviving ridiculous conditions. "I'm listening, Professor," I said, leaning back in a chair engineered to support my distinctly non-tentacled, boringly bipedal human form. "You want to talk about adaptation? Let me tell you about something we humans casually call a typical Tuesday in Alaska." The classroom went silent. Even the environmental generators seemed to pause, as if holding their breath in anticipation. Krellax's tentacles twitched. The xenobiological equivalent of Dugo on his translation device clicked with what I was starting to recognize as academic anticipation. Little did they know, Earth wasn't just a planet. Earth was a goddamn survival crucible that would make their most hardcore xeno-survival simulations look like a pleasant afternoon picnic. And I was about to prove it. The moment I mentioned Alaska, a holographic map materialized above the lecture hall. Most of my alien classmates expected some mild environmental challenge. What they were about to learn was that Alaska wasn't just a location, it was nature's personal torture chamber. Alaska, I began, is what happens when a planet decides to play psychological warfare with its dominant species. The crystalline student to my left, ZX Lara, adjusted her translation matrix. Her form flickered, demonstrating confusion. "Your planet intentionally creates hostile environments." I chuckled. "Not creates. Exists. Big difference." I launched into the story of my Uncle Marcus, a wildlife photographer who made most survival experts look like pampered tourists. Picture this: negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's so cold that if you throw a cup of hot water into the air, it literally turns to instant ice crystals before touching the ground. Most beings would see this and think, Nope, time to hibernate or migrate humans. We put on slightly thicker socks and get to work. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now fully extended, a sign of extreme academic interest. His translation device was working overtime, converting my casual storytelling into precise scientific documentation. Uncle Marcus, I continued, would spend weeks tracking caribou herds, not with advanced thermal tracking, not with hover drones, with snowshoes, a camera, and what he called standard survival gear, which to any rational species would look like a mobile emergency bunker. The gaseous entity to my right formed what could only be described as a questioning bubble. Its translation matrix rendered a curious what constitutes standard survival gear for your species. I grinned. Oh, you mean besides the obvious things like sub-zero rated clothing, emergency shelter, and enough calories to keep a small army warm. In Marcus's case, it was a custom backpack containing a satellite phone, 3 different types of fire-starting mechanisms, enough high-calorie protein bars to feed a small village, a medical kit that would make most emergency rooms look underprepared, a rifle just in case, and my personal favorite, a flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes. The classroom was now completely silent. Even the environmental generators seemed to be listening. Most animals in Alaska are essentially living weapons, I explained. Grizzly bears that can sprint faster than Olympic athletes. Moose the size of small transport vehicles. Wolves that hunt in coordinated packs so efficient they make military special forces look disorganized. ZX-Lara's crystalline form actually vibrated the xenobiological equivalent of a jaw drop, and humans voluntarily live among these threats. Live, I laughed. We don't just live, we document them, photograph them. Sometimes we even consider them a recreational activity. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now performing what could only be described as an academic version of jazz hands. His translation device was creating so much data that small holographic notations were spontaneously generating around him. One winter, I said, leaning forward, Uncle Marcus spent 22 days tracking a specific caribou migration. Temperatures never rose above -20. No permanent shelter, just a tent, his camera, and what he called proper preparation. The gaseous entity had now completely condensed, a clear sign of total absorption in the narrative. And here's the kicker, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He considered this a vacation. The classroom erupted in a cacophony of translation matrices, biological shock responses, and what could only be described as xenobiological disbelief. Alaska, I was about to explain, was just the beginning. The silence that followed my Alaska story wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of profound stillness you might expect if someone had just revealed the universe's most mind-bending secret. Professor Krellax was the first to recover. His tentacles, all 7 of them, seemed to be individually processing different aspects of my narrative. One tentacle was frantically updating holographic notes. Another appeared to be performing what could only be described as a mathematical panic dance. Let me understand, he gurgled through the translation device. Your species voluntarily travels to environments that would terminate most biological systems for the purpose of documentation. I nodded. Yep, we call it research or sometimes weekend plans. The crystalline student ZX-Lara had gone from vibrant blue to a pale, almost translucent shade. Her form flickered with what I was learning was alien confusion. But the energy expenditure, the survival risks, the complete irrationality of such behavior. Welcome to humanity, I said with a grin. We do things because we can, and sometimes because someone told us we probably shouldn't. A student in the back, a being that looked like a cross between a walking coral reef and a quantum computer, raised what passed for a hand. Its translation matrix hummed with mathematical precision. Statistical probability of survival in such conditions would suggest a 0.0037% chance of successful mission completion. To most species, I replied, that would be a deterrent. To humans, that sounds like a challenge. Professor Krellax's middle eye, the green one, was now spinning in what I'd come to recognize as peak academic excitement. Please elaborate on the psychological framework that enables such behavior. I leaned back, knowing I was about to blow their collective alien minds. Humans have this unique ability, I explained, to look at a situation that would make any rational being run away, and instead think, I wonder if I can do that thing, but harder, The classroom was now a symphony of translation devices, each one struggling to convert the pure, unadulterated essence of human audacity into their respective linguistic frameworks. Take mountain climbing, I continued. We don't just climb mountains, we climb the most dangerous mountains, in the worst conditions, sometimes just to prove we can. ZX Lara's form had now stabilized, but her translation device was emitting a sound that I was pretty sure was the alien equivalent of a nervous breakdown. But why? What evolutionary advantage could possibly justify such behavior? I smiled. The classic human response was about to drop. Because it's there, I said simply. Because someone said we couldn't. Because the mountain exists and therefore we must conquer it. The classroom erupted into a cacophony of biological responses. The coral quantum computer being was now generating complex probability matrices. ZX Lara looked like she was either about to shatter or have a scientific revelation. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now performing what could only be described as an academic victory dance. Remarkable, he gurgled. Completely irrational. Statistically improbable. And yet I finished for him. Utterly, magnificently human. The stage was set. They thought the Alaska story was impressive. They had no idea what was coming next. If Alaska was humanity's cold survival manual, Australia was our master class in dealing with an entire continent that seemed hell-bent on murdering its inhabitants. So I said, noting the still stunned expressions of my alien classmates, let's talk about Australia. Professor Krellax's tentacles frozen mid-motion suggested he was both terrified and fascinated. Another extreme environment, he asked, his translation device wavering slightly. Extreme, I laughed. Australia isn't an environment. It's a biological challenge wrapped in a dare, inside a warning label. The holographic display shifted, showing a map of the Australian continent. Immediately, warning markers began populating the screen, each one representing a different potentially lethal organism or environmental condition. In most ecosystems, I explained, predators are spread out. In Australia, everything is a potential predator. And I mean everything. ZX Lara's crystalline form flickered with what I now recognized as scientific curiosity. Elaborate. I launched into the story of my cousin Emma, a marine biologist who made most survival experts look like amateur campers. Emma's standard field research kit includes antivenin for at least 6 different snake species, a first aid kit that looks like a small medical warehouse, protective gear that could probably stop a small missile, and a sense of humor that makes facing certain death look like a mild inconvenience. The coral quantum computer being was now generating holographic risk assessment models that were becoming increasingly complex and slightly hysterical. Let me give you an example, I continued. In Australia, we have creatures that have evolved specifically to be absolute nightmares. The box jellyfish? Its venom is so potent that it can kill a human in 3 minutes. Most species would avoid such waters. Humans? We develop specialized protective suits and go swimming anyway. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now performing what could only be described as a mathematical panic dance. But the risk. The statistical improbability of survival. Risk, I chuckled. To humans, that's just another word for opportunity. I described how Australians casually deal with situations that would send most species into complete evolutionary panic. Venomous spiders the size of dinner plates? Normal Tuesday? Snakes that can kill you with a single bite? Just another day in the backyard. Creatures that seem designed by a committee of sadistic evolutionary engineers, standard wildlife. One summer, I said, leaning forward, my cousin Emma was tracking marine life near the Great Barrier Reef. She encountered a blue-ringed octopus, one of the most venomous creatures on the planet. One bite contains enough neurotoxin to kill 26 adult humans in minutes. The classroom was now completely silent. Even the environmental generators seemed to be holding their breath. Most researchers would retreat. Emma, she photographed it, documented its behavior, and then casually mentioned it in her research log like she was discussing the weather. ZX Lara's translation matrix was now emitting a sound that I was pretty sure was the alien equivalent of an existential crisis. Humanity, I concluded, doesn't just survive. We look danger in the eye, wink, and ask if it wants to dance. The implications were slowly sinking into my alien classmates. Humanity wasn't just a species. We were a force of nature that evolution itself seemed to view with a mixture of respect and terror. And I was just getting started. The classroom had transformed. What began as a standard xenobiological lecture had become something between a scientific inquisition and a collective existential crisis. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now fully extended, each one seemingly processing a different aspect of human improbability. "You cannot be serious," he gurgled, his translation device working overtime to capture the nuanced disbelief. "Oh, I'm completely serious," I replied. "And I haven't even gotten to the good part." The coral quantum computer being which I'd learned was named NX-POR had been generating increasingly complex probability matrices. Its holographic displays now looked like a mathematical nervous breakdown, with risk assessment algorithms spinning into increasingly chaotic patterns. ZX Lara, the crystalline student, had stabilized her form but was radiating an energy that suggested she was one revelation away from a complete scientific meltdown. "Humans," I continued, "don't just survive. We turn survival into an art form, a challenge, and occasionally, a comedy routine." I was about to drop my most extreme story, yet the one that would truly demonstrate humanity's unique approach to existence. Let me tell you about my grandfather, Marcus Reeves, not to be confused with my Alaska exploring uncle. Marcus was a search and rescue specialist in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The holographic display shifted, showing a rugged landscape of rocky terrain, extreme temperature variations, and what could only be described as geological warfare. Most species would look at this environment and immediately implement evacuation protocols, I explained. Humans? We developed specialized teams to not just survive, but to rescue others in these conditions. Marcus's story was the pinnacle of human audacity. A search and rescue mission in the Rocky Mountains during a winter so brutal that most biological systems would have shut down immediately, temperatures dropping to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, wind speeds that could strip paint off metal, terrain so treacherous that even geological surveys considered it essentially impassable. Standard rescue gear for Marcus included specialized thermal gear that could maintain body temperature in conditions that would freeze most liquids instantly, communication equipment designed to work when electronics themselves were contemplating suicide, enough emergency medical supplies to restart an entire ecosystem, a psychological resilience that made most survival algorithms look like mild suggestions. Professor Krellax's middle eye, the green one, was now spinning so fast it was creating a small gravitational distortion in the lecture hall. The story unfolded of a rescue mission where Marcus's team located and extracted a group of hikers who had been stranded in conditions that defied rational explanation. Not through advanced technology, not through overwhelming force, but through pure, unadulterated human determination. "They didn't just survive," I said, my voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "They survived, rescued others, and then filed a report like it was a moderately challenging day at the office." NX-POR's probability matrices had now completely collapsed. ZX Lara looked like she was simultaneously having a scientific breakthrough and a nervous breakdown. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now performing what could only be described as an academic version of a victory dance mixed with pure, unbridled terror. Humanity, I concluded, isn't just a species. We're a universal statement that says, the impossible is just a suggestion we haven't gotten around to ignoring yet. The classroom was beyond silence. It was in a state of collective existential recalibration, and I was about to deliver the final blow. Silence. Pure, absolute, universe-altering silence. Professor Krellax was the first to break it. His tentacles had somehow managed to tie themselves into what looked like a mathematical Gordian knot of pure academic shock. "Student Reeves." He finally gurgled through the translation device. "Are you suggesting that your species intentionally develops survival strategies that defy every known biological preservation protocol?" I grinned. "We don't just suggest it, we celebrate it." The classroom had transformed from a sterile academic environment to something resembling a collective existential crisis. ZX Lara's crystalline form was vibrating at a frequency that suggested she was simultaneously experiencing terror, excitement, and what I could only describe as scientific puberty. NX-POR, the coral quantum computer being, had generated so many probability matrices that the holographic displays were now creating mini-universe simulations just to process the concept of human existence. Let me be clear, I continued, my voice taking on a tone of almost philosophical revelation. Humanity doesn't just survive. We turn survival into performance art. We look at impossible situations and see opportunity. We transform limitations into challenges, and challenges into elaborate jokes about our own capabilities. The translation devices were working overtime, struggling to capture the nuanced essence of human audacity. Most species, I explained, evolved to avoid danger. Humans? We evolved to look danger in the eye, wink, and ask if it wants to dance. Professor Krellax's tentacles were now performing what could only be described as an academic version of a victory dance mixed with pure, unbridled terror. But the statistical improbability, he exclaimed. Statistics, I replied, are just suggestions we haven't decided to ignore yet. The revelation was complete. Humanity wasn't just another species in the galactic catalog. We were a universal statement of possibility. A living, breathing reminder that the universe's rules were more like helpful guidelines than actual limitations. Zxlera's translation matrix finally produced a sound that I was pretty sure translated to what the actual quantum mechanics. One more thing, I said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial grin. We're just getting started. The classroom erupted. Not in panic, not in fear, but in a cacophony of translation devices, biological responses, and what could only be described as a collective scientific awakening. Humanity had just been introduced to the galactic community, and we were going to be absolutely insufferable about it. Professor Krellax's final words summed it up perfectly. Translated with a mixture of terror and grudging respect, may the universe have mercy on us all. My response was simple. I winked. Game. Set. Humanity.